Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 of Circle of Fellows, the monthly broadcast/podcast where I join four of my fellow fellows for a communications-themed discussion. And today, that discussion is all about planning for measurement, planning to measure your communication efforts. And we have a terrific panel of IABC fellows to talk about planning to measure, creating an effective measurement plan. And I will let you each introduce yourselves, and we'll go in the precise order of how your thumbnails appear to me on my screen. So left to right, that makes you first, Angela.
Well, let me just tell you why I do measurement. Early in my career, I was a corporate communicator, and we got a new CEO who was an accountant, and the only way to connect with him was to figure out how to measure. But it led to my getting a promotion, a staff, a budget during a recession. So I just never turned my back on measurement and stayed with it. So about 17 years ago, when I started my own firm, I decided this is my passion. This is what I should focus on. So Sinickas Communications is all research, all measurement, all the time.
Great. And I think you have that reputation that has built around all of that effort. People I've never heard of will say, oh, communication measurement, you need to talk to Angela.
Yes. Yay!
Yeah, I've heard of her. Brad, you're up next.
Hi, Brad Whitworth. I was going to say a new kid on the block at a place that's very familiar to me in some ways. I'm at HP Enterprise for about the last 2 months. Spent 23 years of my career at HP, so it's good to be back, but in an organization that is way different than the one I had been in. Have done communications, both internal and external, for companies like Cisco and HP and PeopleSoft, now Oracle, and a few other spots where communications measurement has always been a portion of the responsibility. And I keep thinking, back, and the gold quills that I have under my belt all come from having learned lessons from Angela about measurement and evaluation. I just wish I had budget to do it really, really well. And I found ways to do things much less expensively. And I think that's one of the topics we'll probably talk about today.
Yeah, in fact, budget is probably an apt topic when discussing planning, because a lot of communicators don't plan in their budget for measurement. And Brad, I just have to say, after reading the business pages today, HP Enterprise sounds like a happier place to be than Cisco.
Indeed.
Announced another 1,100 layoffs. George, you're up next.
Yeah, George McGrath here in New York. I have my own public relations practice and been in the agency side of the business for over 30 years. So measurement is obviously critical in dealing with our clients. We've got to be accountable for the results that we get. And it's always, measurement, I find, in public relations is always a challenge, because you can have very full rig measurement programs when you're working on a very large budget project. Let's say a launch of a major new consumer product. There might be like a $500,000 public relations budget. Within that, the measurement component could be easily $25,000, $30,000 or more. But if you're, I think, a more typical corporate communicator, you may have your whole PR budget with your department may be $500,000. So how do you do measurement cost effectively? What things can you measure? Because you still have to be accountable for it. And that's a challenge for us in our business too, because while we work on very large projects with large budgets, we have some things that are really just much smaller projects on a particular issue. And again, you have to justify the results you're getting.
Right. And Mary, you're up last.
I was going to say, let me finish us off. Mary Hills from Hyman Hills Marketing Group in the lovely city of Chicago. Very windy today. I know you're surprised at that. But I also, in the evening, teach out of Loyola University Chicago's Global Strategic Communication Master's Program. And I also teach out of an accelerated MBA program. And so you're saying, oh my God, what is she even doing on this call? But my background in research and measurement actually comes out of the fields of finance and marketing. So all of my undergraduate work was spent in the capital markets and doing research and measurement of companies themselves. So when I moved over into marketing and then communication, it all just came with me. So most of what we do at Hyman Hills is research. And obviously, that's the starting point to get what we should be measuring and what we want to happen. So we're known more as researchers than measurers, because we do the foundational research and then just pick up what we want to measure off of whatever we have to get done. So, but good to see everybody, and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it should be a good one. And let me start it off with an observation and get your take on this. I have just started judging the 2017 Content Marketing Institute Awards. I was on the Blue Ribbon panel for Gold Quill for IABC this year. And in fact, Brad and I were in San Francisco for that, judging together. And I also do judging for the Reagan Communications suite of competitions. And one of the things that is glaringly obvious when you're doing these judging exercises and looking at the entries is which ones had planned to measure and which ones realized that there was an evaluation section that they had to submit in the entry and came up with something. And in that latter category, which I think is the vast majority, they all talk about impressions. We were able to figure out that we got 1.7 million impressions. And these are the ones that I am second most likely to just put in the lose pile, because the actual measurement is not aligned even close to what their goals were at the top of the entry. And I have to say the ones that I'm most inclined to throw into the lose pile are the ones that use advertising value equivalencies. But is this your experience? Do most people not plan to measure in this industry, but come up with some metrics based on analytics that they can get through Google after the fact?
I share your pain, because I was judging the PRSA bronze anvils and silver anvils. And one of the things you're talking about, advertising value equivalency, let's just sort of define it if people don't work in the PR world. It says that if you get a certain amount of coverage for like news coverage, feature coverage, they turn it into a dollar value, as if you had to buy advertising to fill that amount of space on that page or that number of minutes on that broadcast. And they kind of tweak it a little bit, but it's just a totally bogus measurement, because for many reasons, it's not real money. It doesn't really hit a bottom line, has nothing to do with anything real. It's like talking about how much monopoly money it's worth. And just to sort of add to this, there's something called the Barcelona Declaration of Measurement Principles that came out in 2010. And one of those 7 principles is advertising value equivalency is not a meaningful measure. And yet every single agency that submitted to the PRSA Awards, every single one of them calculated in AVE.
And I understand from a lot of people, the reason is because the boss understands that and they're asking for it. But yeah, the Barcelona principles absolutely have said never, ever, ever use that. My problem with AVEs is that you're measuring something you're not trying to accomplish, because advertising has goals that are not the same as PR and corporate communication.
Right. And they're really not comparable, because in advertising, you control your message, and in whatever news coverage you got, you might have gotten a lot of ink, but you didn't get your key messages out. They spelled your company name wrong, and what's worth nothing.
Yeah, I always wondered how do you measure a negative story? What's that's worth? Is that like negative advertising value? Like we destroyed like $15 million of our advertising budget because we had a bad, story about a defective product on the front page of the New York Times. So that's why that metric is always one that's never made much sense.
Well, I mean, there are many. If you go back a little bit further, column inches was sort of like the bugaboo a while back, and we now have the electronic equivalents of column inches of measurement. So I think it shows. I wouldn't necessarily call it in the lose pile, but it's in the needs a lot of work and some coaching. And many times, I don't think people have been taught much people coming out of traditional communications backgrounds probably didn't, they ran as far away as they possibly could from a lot of the quant classes that it might include statistics and evaluation and, higher levels of math beyond maybe algebra 2. And so I think part of it is incumbent upon us to help do a little bit better job of teaching people the importance of metrics and how you can do it. And I also think it sometimes shows a lack of tie into the business, because maybe if people don't understand the business goals, they can't come up with creative, effective ways of measuring the communications value and how that contributes to what it is that the organization is trying to accomplish.
It's interesting. I saw an article just the other day, and I don't have it in front of me, but I'll put the link in the show notes. And the headline was something like, universities are failing the PR industry. And it's because in communication curriculum, you're not finding some of the basics like writing and measurement. They're dealing with other issues and then coming into the PR world where they need to be able to write and measure, and they don't have those skills.
Well, and you bring up a good
I don't know,
point.
Mary, you teach. Is that
Yeah.
something
You know what? Loyola Chicago's master's program is young. In fact, we just had our first graduates come out of the program. So it's a 2-year full-time program. But interestingly, the reason that they even contacted me to teach was what the board, the people that were on the board at the school said, and we're talking big pharmaceutical board members here. And what they said is, if you are going to have a global strategic communication program, you must teach the business side, because that's the biggest gap that we have right now in millennials coming out of higher ed. And so they put feelers out, and IABC has always had a strong connection with Loyola Chicago. And they said, well, talk to Mary Hills. And and they said, oh, absolutely. So every single course I start out with, we look at it from the business side. And students kind of sit there and go, gee, I feel like, is this all about comm? Yeah, because you're communicating for the entity. And I think they often think that, and Angie and I were talking about this, I said one of the hiccups that comes up is, we think we are putting together a communication campaign or a program for a specific moment in time. But, when we look at strategic comms, it's about building the relationships. It's about telling the story. Well, that continuum goes on and on and on. And there are multiple sequences that occur in that continuum. And students come in thinking, oh, if I did the advertising campaign, if I did the PR, whatever it is, it's a once and done. And you say, no. In two-way communication, it's not. And so that's, and I guess when I started working with this group in particular, I thought we made more progress on that front, but apparently we didn't.
Right. So let's talk about planning for measurement. And that really begins with knowing what you're trying to accomplish with the communication in the first place, doesn't it?
I think you have to ask that's a very simple question to ask yourself at the beginning of anything you're about to do, is how will we know if this makes a difference? It's a very simple question. But to ask that before you start planning, it's going to change what you do, because that's immediately going to make you do some research before you develop your plan. And research could be as simple as talking to 5 key stakeholders. It doesn't have to start out with a survey and focus groups. And, it's assessing what you can observe, what metrics are available out there, talk to a few people before you start doing that. And then start building in you can often put in really simple metrics that are meaningful if you just ask that question. Like if you're going to say, well, we want people to go to a particular page on a particular website to do something, sign up for something, donate money, enroll in something, an action page. If you just ask, how will we know that it worked? You're going to make sure, number one, you're tracking how many people came to that page, but you'll also do something very inexpensive and really key, is that for all the different channels you use in your campaign, you'll use a slightly different version of the URL, putting different parameters at the end of it, so you can tell which of your communication approaches drove people to the page you're trying to drive them to. Cost you nothing, But you have to plan for it at the very beginning, saying, how will we know that this worked?
And I think some of the problem that you point to, Angie, comes from the fact that one is people don't have a lot of intellectual curiosity sometimes about this stuff. Many communications people are given marching orders, and for a long time, I think all of us have agreed in the profession that we're sort of the order takers. Go out and communicate this, figure out a plan to launch that, and we did look at it, as Mary said, sort of as this one-time thing. And when we got done, and we marked that as a check mark. And I also don't think that sometimes people want to or tend to want to explore the whys that you talk about, or even look at where is the start line and where is the finish line, and sort of what data do I have that already exists that show me where I'm starting, so that I can show that I have actually moved the needle from beginning to end. And like you said, around you, without even there's a lot of rich stuff that you can do. One of the first things I do in a place is look at what sort of existing survey work has been done. And I keep saying, on the internal side of things, it's often easy because you have these voice of workforce surveys and engagement surveys that often have a heavy communications component in there, and you can go in and start just looking at that data to begin with before you even have to do anything on your own. Valuable, but it starts up here with I got to think about this stuff before I start working on everything else.
Well, and just to jump on that, Brad, I still remember there's an article you wrote. You probably wrote versions of it elsewhere, but it was an article that you did when you correlated some engagement survey results from HP, and this replicated what other people had found at GE at the time. The questions were already asked, the data were already in. You just asked the people who were doing this to correlate two things. Was there any connection between any of the communication questions and any of the desirable outcome questions? And if I recall correctly, you found there was a really strong connection between how highly employees rated their supervisors on communication skills, with two outcomes. One, being as productive as they could be, and two, wanting to stay at the company, which is another huge bottom line impact. So that's data that's already there. Somebody else paid for it, but it's us making that connection.
And the fun part about that was going to this poor person in HR who was having to run regular routine reports and going saying, I've got this curiosity, and she found the research work and doing the correlation to be sort of an exciting, enlightening, fun thing to do that was sort of out of the ordinary of running general crumb reports from SAS hitting the database. So I think sometimes, I'm know enough about stats, but wouldn't know how to go and actually program the thing to do that. But to enlist that sort of help out of intellectual curiosity and making it exciting. This is the Tom Sawyer approach to getting the fence painted.
Well, that's what any good communicator does in a number of different dimensions of our work. Back in the print days, I didn't know how to hang plates on a press, but I knew that I wanted a spot varnish and a bleed, so you tell the designer and the printer what you want and they execute. Right. But one of the challenges, and I, by the way, I do want to let everyone who's watching live know that we are taking questions, and you can send us your questions by using Twitter and the hashtag COF21. That's Circle of Fellows, COF21. I'm monitoring, and as those questions come in, I'll pass them along. But one of the challenges of measurement planning is knowing what measurement tools you're going to need to measure each particular kind of communication. If you're trying to engage the marketplace, you would probably want to use different tools than if you're trying to increase awareness or preference, right? So when you make the plan, don't you need to identify the measurement tools that have to be in place at the beginning, so it's gathering that data that might not be available when everything is finished?
Well, and one of the things that I have found is beneficial, and it goes to Brad's choice of the words engagement, right? But we know that, we have to have at least 3 touch points on the same message. That's the minimum. And it can go as high as 8 or 9, depending on the group that you're communicating with. So developing what we're seeing a lot of use now is that touch point map, and it sits down, and you can pretend it's Candyland. You can put it in a matrix so you feel more like an adult, whatever you want to do. But the point is to capture each one of those events and say, okay, so what do I expect to occur when I send out the first hit on this message? And the other thing that enables communicators to do is, if we don't get the result that we want on that first hit, then we can monitor and adjust the plan. And so we're getting rid of that whole thing of, I'm just going to measure this at the end. How many people came to the website? How many people called in at this certain number and asked for this? Instead, what we're doing is we're actually looking at each specific touch point, and we plot that, and then we say, what am I going to use? What do I need to know at this point in time to either fish or cut bait on the plan, right? And hopefully we're not going to cut bait. Hopefully we're going to, monitor and then adjust those activities so we're a little bit closer to where we want to be. Because if we just measure at the end, we're missing all that opportunity to adjust to the marketplace that comes before that.
Well, I think that ties into the fact that, again, most people don't even know the difference between long-term kinds of measurements and short-term. We were lucky, and especially when you pointed out the judging work that you guys have been doing and that I've been involved with, often those are sort of short-term. Sort of like, if you see any, it's most often a pre-post kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Before we did this, it was here. After we did it, it was here. And that's good and a start, but it also doesn't take into account that, okay, what happens 2 weeks after that post measurement? Did it drop off, or was it just a temporary kind of thing? And so you need to bake into people's brains again this idea that your responsibility is not only to measure the effects of that one immediate communications, but also sort of over time, what's going on? Is it getting better generally? What are the trends behind all of this stuff? And to me, at some point, would it be nice if we're having an argument about, there is good measurement going on, but it's not complete measurement because they're only doing this part, or they're only doing that part and they're not doing this. So when we start getting into those sorts of arguments, instead of where are the numbers, we'll have accomplished something.
Just to build on that.
I like the conversation around longitudinal measurement, and Brad, I seem to recall, and this could be a fuzzy memory because it's back in the days of Measure magazine at Hewlett Packard, but I swear I remember you telling me the story of employees kind of being disenchanted when they heard that the HP executives were flying around on the private fleet of jets, when it was in fact engineers who were flying into customers to deal with issues on the ground without having to wait for a commercial flight to become available. And to deal with that, you explained in the magazine what the fleet of jets was for, and then measured whether employees went, oh, I get it, and that doesn't bother me anymore. And then looked at it again like a year later to see if that anger had resurfaced or if everybody was still copacetic with that.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, it was the HP Video magazine, and we did that before we launched it. And just even one sort of other little trick of the trade that I was able to put together, because we were still in pilot mode, was I had a test group and a control group. And so, the control group answered the question, not having ever seen this episode of the video magazine, and the test group saw it and then answered the questions. And to be able to measure the difference between the two, in a sense, identical kinds of groups in terms of the makeup, and then you're right, we also then showed the whole thing later on to other groups, and we were able to track it over time. So I'm not a measurement expert, but I hang around enough smart people that some of it rubs off and actually sticks. And I love doing this stuff and just wish I were even better at it.
And let me just build on that, because I was going to actually say something about this. What you're talking about, pilot and control groups, if we just say, here's what the level of result was before we communicated and after, there's no connection between what we did and that result. It could be accidental. It could be that something else happened that led to that improved result. So we do have to do something to make that connection. And one excellent way is pilot and control groups, where you purposely do just what you did. But even in the PR world, we get so many accidental pilot groups that we just don't even realize we have it out there. You complain that you didn't get the coverage you wanted all around the US or something. Well, hey, that's a perfect laboratory experiment. Take a look at some of the markets where you had the heaviest coverage. Look at the markets where you had the least amount of coverage, and what happened to your sales for whatever you were promoting during that time period. So that's an accidental pilot waiting to happen. Or you can track the timing, when do sales or when do other things go up or down as you want them to, based on the timing of what you did. Like, I know Reader's Digest, when they promote some of their book authors, they track through very simple, inexpensive, they track through Amazon.com, one of their distributors, how many people have ordered the particular book that particular author spoke about in that particular marketplace, and compare that about sales of other books and in other markets. And they see the spikes and they can say, we know at least this much money was made in the first 24 hours, and that usually covers the whole cost of it. So using this concept of pilots, purposeful or accidental, does not have to cost you anything and actually can cost you less money.
But one of the downsides to that is that we have come from, again, I sort of look at our history, we've come from sort of the one-size-fits-all version of communication. We're not used to, I think, in general, doing a lot of audience segmentation, a lot of splitting of things, sort of like we were called in, I think, oftentimes on the internal communication side of things because this hierarchical communications mechanism of cascading messages didn't work. So we came up with this, we can solve that by doing mass communications things. And so we just did, this blast that would reach everybody equally at the same time. And sadly, we really didn't start to think about it. I think we're getting more sophisticated and we're getting a little bit better. And we realize that not everybody consumes information the same way. And we need to do a little bit better job of measuring things sort of audience by audience. And that, the way a manufacturing employee receives information, the kind of information they want, the questions they have might be different than somebody who's doing research and development, or maybe way different from somebody doing sales. And so we're beginning to have to think beyond sort of the one size fits all that doesn't work in t-shirts and it doesn't work in communication and it doesn't work in measurement.
George, I want to ask you a question. I'll tee this up a little. I had just started as a senior consultant with an HR consulting firm in the communications practice, and the benefits consultant took me out to the client to talk about the communications plan for whatever it was, an enrollment or something like that. And I talked about building in the measurement, and the client said, no, we don't want to do that. And I started to talk about why it's so important. And I got a very stern look from my people, while the client said, measurement is just trying to make extra money. You're just looking for extra billable hours in this assignment, and we just don't need that. And my question is it a tough sell in the agency world to get the clients to bake the measurement into the total budget for the project?
Yeah, I don't think it is. It depends, I guess, on the project. I don't think it is on in the marketing projects, because they've got that discipline of measuring advertising, measuring the impact of direct mail, measuring the impacts of all these programs. So if anything, you're expected to bring that kind of vigorous measurement into what you do. It's probably more of a, and I think it works on things where there's a lot at stake. Let's say you're working on a big public policy issue where there could be a big financial impact to your company, your industry. That's not too hard to sell. Polling and checking stakeholders' attitudes on things. It's I guess more like the everyday operation of the communication function that could be more challenging. Just how do we measure the impact of our ongoing media relations and activities in a company, for example? And how do we go beyond just counting clips or looking at our exposure and really kind of analyzing the results of what we're getting for the program? And I think that's the area I think we have a challenge measuring the everyday, because again, these marketing programs, they've got big budgets, there's measurement built into it, it's expected it gets done. It's working on just sort of how do we have a discipline about what we're doing day to day that we can be held accountable for.
Let me share a funny story with you. The same you're talking about a relationship with a major retail company, but their request for proposal specifically said, we do not want you to include any research and measurement, period, because it just inflates the budget. But we knew that without good research, you can't come up with a good plan. So the people in charge of that client sent an email to all the communication consultants around the US and said, if you happen this weekend to be going to one of these stores, please casually wander in and ask several of the clerks that you see these 3 questions, and then email me and tell me what you heard. And they put that together as part of their pitch. They said, as requested, our proposal includes no research and measurement. However, because we believe in it so strongly, we've done some for you at our own cost. And they not only got the project, the relationship, but they also were then tasked with putting together a research budget. So you can often do that informally, cheaply, and show them what you've already learned that's different from what they're expecting is out there. And that can get them to understand the value of doing it.
Well, and Angela, I think that sometimes we're our own worst enemy, right? So, we kind of do the a la carte approach to pricing, and we unbundle all of these things, and we said, well, if you want the research, here you get this. If you want the strategy, this is going to cost you this, and we land up, creating a pricing segment model, whereas here's the things that are going to be done, and they include the research and they include the measurement, and we should just not even call them that. They're part of doing quality strategic communication management. And so I know at Hyman Hills, when we first started out, we were worried that we would be perceived as expensive, a boutique, marketing and communication firm, and we tried, the unbundled. And what we said is, we're now looking, and when we tried to do a summary on the value, we didn't have anything to talk about because we didn't have any of those things. And so we just keep it right in, here is the price, and we stopped doing the a la carte whole approach to that. And I think that is a difference between if we say that, because usually what we do at Hyman Hills is we use the word strategic. So right away we're talking about, well, this is longer term. And it makes it easier to understand that you're looking at the goals and the business goals and objectives of the firm or whoever you're working with. And so that becomes a given. The other thing that we have found, thinking on the agency side and what you can sell and what you can't sell, I think the other thing is that we want to have conversations with the decision maker in companies. Someone who wasn't just, got an amount, go out and you have to do this communication and it's going to be this amount, that's it. If we come in and we talk about what has to be done, that is more strategic. And so we've kind of found in our own selling communication, we have to kind of watch our P's and Q's to say, we don't want to compromise the integrity and quality of the program that we're going to put together. So we kind of have those things that are already integrated into whatever we're going to do. But I think the other thing that, what we see an awful lot of is this whole idea that we focus on, and I need to kind of give you a warning first off. We look at the goals and objectives of the business. But I think that as communication professionals, and this gets to some of the discussion we just had, I think we have a responsibility to also measure what are against the standards of our industry, against the best practices of our industry. And so we're so busy now, we've got people coming in and they're saying, oh no, we've got, this is the business goal and I've got to achieve this. Well, but as a communication professional, we have a responsibility to the integrity of the field as well. And I think we don't want to put those measurement things in there. I think we want to keep those hidden and secret in case, it's going to implode on us at some point. But I think we want to talk about how we are going to measure this and we're going to see how does Facebook versus Twitter, whatever it might be, and say, this is how we're improving our channel strategy and take it from there. So I think measurement has to look at both of those. I think that we do achieve the business goals and objectives, but I think that we have to have something along the profession goals and objectives that can be achieved as well.
Well, there's data and analysis, and there's no shortage. You can get no shortage of data that tells you what's happening with your communications program. These are the number of social media engagements we had. This is how our key messages got through. This is the traffic that we drove to the call to action on our website. But the big thing we have to take away from it is, how did we do that? Why was a program so successful? Or in another case, why did a program not work as well? And there's, again, no shortage of these reports you can get from a lot of sources, but then you got to sit down as the communication strategist and look through it and say, what can I learn from this in terms of a best practice I can apply to the next project to do better?
One of the issues that I have with the measurement that we get is that if you look at the engagement, for example, George, that you were just talking about, that's more or less an intermediary effect, right? I mean, the fact that people engaged with you doesn't mean they bought your product or voted for your candidate or called their congressman or whatever it was you wanted them to do. The outcome. Katie Payne talks in terms of output, outtake, and outcomes. And most of the measures that I see people talking about are in the outtake.
Yeah,
part of that.
If they get a perception change, they're done, and that's really not
right.
I mean, just as an example, back when I was at Mercer at Hewitt, we had a client where we had communicated how to diversify your 401k savings plan, and it communicated really well. If you were just measuring perceptions, everyone understood, or I mean, very high percentage understood that they needed to diversify, how that needed to change when they got older, and yet when we looked at the actual statistics, we had such a huge number of people over age 55, 100% invested in their own company's stock. So until we did the focus group research to figure out why we were getting these outcomes, knowledge wasn't the problem at all. They talked about how they knew they were doing the wrong thing, but why were they doing it? Because their company, through its ups and downs, had never had layoffs and had been loyal to employees. So during this particular downturn, they wanted to show their loyalty back by putting all of their money in the company stock, which is like the last thing HR wanted them to be doing. But it had nothing to do with achieving the perception and knowledge of how to diversify. So we've got to go beyond the perception to the action you do. Got to be there.
Real quickly, just want to remind people who are watching live or anybody who has tuned in recently that you can ask a question via Twitter using the hashtag COF21. That's Circle of Fellows, COF21. So, Brad, were you about to say something?
Well, I think it gets back to, I'm not sure that most people are trained in critical thinking. George hit on it with the analysis side of things. Again, especially data analysis. I don't think, again, it's one of those things that most people spend a lot of time focused on. And I'm not sure that there are a lot of great tutors out there that, whether you're in school or maybe even in the profession, if I were to count the number of people outside of this immediate group that focus on communication metrics and are really good at inspiring people and holding them to higher levels of accountability, you could probably count them on a couple of hands if you're missing some fingers. So we probably need more people who are pushing for this as a part of, you're not a communications professional, a communications strategist until you master this set of skills.
It's interesting because I was reading not too long ago that a very few number of journalism schools are starting to add data journalism courses because data journalism is getting to be an important thing. I'm not aware of any communication academic discipline that is teaching data communication. And I look at the programs of professional organizations, whether it's at the local chapter level or at the international conference level, and I don't see data communication.
I think I've got a proposal in the works now. Good point.
Oh, good.
Well, hang on, Angie, because I already submitted it to IABC World Conference and it didn't make it. I think they probably didn't even, I don't think they could understand the proposal and what it meant. But
that's the issue. It's important, but people don't get it yet.
They don't get it yet. Yeah. And one of the things that I do in one of the courses that I teach, Leadership and Change, is instead of me delivering the message, I bring in a certified public accountant. And what he does is say, He has snippets up on the slide deck. But the one thing that accompanies that is the assignment that says, determine the financial health of the organization that you are interested in working for or you currently work for. And there are 4 simple metrics. You're coming out of finance, and I don't even want to tell you how many decades I've spent in finance. This isn't rocket science. And, we provide a little health sheet. And so it actually works so well when we used it the first time. That was the foundation for the proposal that I put into IABC. If students can do this who, the last time they had math was in undergrad, right? And it was probably basic math, not stats for sure. If they can do this and understand that, hey, I want to work for this company, but now I'm looking at their financial health and, wow, these guys aren't looking so healthy right now, then, that changes even their whole career aspirations.
Yeah.
You need to work for other companies too, financially healthy companies.
And some of this analysis doesn't even really require math. So here's a really simple thing we did for one client. They're a retail organization. They have 13 geographic units. That's how we broke out the demographics on a communication survey. And that's also, surprise, how finance breaks out their financial reports. So all we did is we organized from top to bottom the areas that were best informed to least informed about strategy. Side by side, we put together the same regions from most profitable to least profitable. And surprise, the region that was the best informed about strategy by far was the most profitable by far. The 3 regions that had the least understanding of strategy were in the bottom 5 of profitability. Now, this isn't proving cause and effect, but that's what we call a correlation or a double coincidence, if you like. But anyone shouldn't continue to take expensive item. Well, a really simple way to figure that out. We went back to their communication survey that was broken out by country, and we looked at which countries were translating the magazine. And by some simple math, we found out that if you were reading the company magazine, the strategic magazine, in your native language, which could be English in some countries, but if it was in your native language, you were 20 percentage points better informed about 4 key topics. Now, that's data. That's not just my opinion is we should or shouldn't translate. That says, here's the results. If you want those results, you got to spend the money doing the translations. And that anyone can do.
And you're sure it wasn't alternate data?
In our post-truth environment. Another issue that I have a problem with in a lot of the communication plans I see is, we were talking a minute ago about the difference between output, outtake, and outcome, and everybody should want to measure the outcome, but the outcome of what? Exactly, because, particularly in marketing, but in other communication challenges as well, there's phases that the audience goes through. I mean, we call it the marketing funnel in the marketing world, awareness, knowledge, consideration, preference, and action. And don't we need to be measuring each of those? Because if, you get to the knowledge stage, but the brand or the product or the service never becomes a consideration, it seems that you're falling down in the middle of the process, not just on whether you converted a sale. Right? Are there communicators who are measuring across those phases, or is everybody pretty much just either focused on outputs, or outcomes?
Well, I think some of the work that actually is coming out of Europe, which trying to think maybe the last 3 or 4 years, there's actually another component to the output, outtake, outcome, and it's called outgrowth. And it's the whole idea of beginning to take everything that is done by an organization and looking at it at that output, outtake, outcome, but also the outgrowth starts bringing in reputation and brand image of the company. And I think a bit of this is being driven by the marketing side because that's what you talk about all the time, right? And so we see that outgrowth component. So where does it fit in the whole scheme of things? rather than we're sitting here at the program and campaign level again. Where does this fit in? And some of what we see in the plans to what you're talking about, Shel, is that, you know, they've timed when they're going to do the communication, but corporate communications has their whole kind of schedule of communication, and marketing's over here saying, but we got to get this out on this day. But the way that the consumer looks at organizations, they look at all the communication that comes out as just coming from the organization. They don't look and say, oh, that came out of CorpCom, or that came out of Marcom, that came out of PR. And so why would we not put our plans together to see what the impact is at the entity level, you know, that outgrowth component? And what they're really kind of advocating for the people that are doing this in Western Europe is saying, you know what we really need to do is realize, where do we fit in as communicators in the whole scheme of things in the organization, instead of, you know, and I can be honest here, marketing always thought that they were better on the communication side. Why? Because we got the big budgets. We got the money. So it always went back to the numbers, right? And we said, oh, that's all you got in internal com. Oh, our budget is 3-4 times. And that created this false sense of value. But it just takes more resources to communicate sometimes to the outside audience. So, but I think the whole idea of where do we fit in the scheme of things and what we do fits in the scheme of the entity and the organization.
Well, and I think we're up for a big challenge too, because if you look at most organizations, they're dealing with big data. I mean, the new language that's being spoken in a lot of places is we have this tremendous amount, this wealth of information, predominantly around the customer, the consumer, their buying behaviors, you know, and if we don't learn how to speak that language, how to look at some of those numbers, and how to do what it is that we have done historically with words, which is how do you take complex ideas and turn them into simple ways that people can understand it, absorb it, and use it to be more productive. If we don't learn that same discipline over sort of in that numbers world, we're going to be sort of left standing, because it's all moving to, you know, there is data probably on everything, you know, and like Angie proved you could do this stuff. One thing that I did at one point in an organization was, much like Mary's CPA friend, I was able to get a finance professor who actually was interesting and not the kind of person who would put you to sleep at night, to come in, and he taught people some basic finance by using a Sherlock Holmes-like story. He called it the case of the Purloined balance sheet. And what he'd done was he'd taken an income statement and a balance sheet and sort of chopped the top off and gave them to people and said, okay, now these are for 3 different companies. One is a bank, one is an airline, one's a grocery store. I need you to figure out which one's which. And the getting communications people sort of wrapped around this, oh, I'm solving the mystery. It's and giving them here are the things you would look for in a grocery store that might have high turnover. This, here's what you might look for in terms of a bank, in terms of. So I think we need to, build up that financial acumen, that curiosity about numbers, the same way we has historically have done so around words and phrases and communications tools available to us.
I just remember when I was back in the corporate world, we had 4 different operating entities. So I really had to learn 4 different companies very quickly. And the shortcut was, rather than going through the whole balance sheet, the whole income statement, I went to the CFO and I said, Bruce, when you get these, what are the first numbers you look at every month for each of these companies? Mm-hmm. And so it's like the shortcut. So for example, for our company, the systems, the big number was how many new contracts were signed, because that's revenue for the next 2 years. Everything else is going to drive off of that. And so I learned which few things to pay attention to see how we were doing.
There's 4. There's 4.
I see all the time in marketing, but never see in corporate communications, organizational communications, is a net promoter score. Is this something that you all have found value using?
Well, it's and I've worked with net promoter probably since about 2005. So, but it's kind of the same thing in when you're looking at feedback on satisfaction. right? Because usually Net Promoter is going to be connected with some sort of a satisfaction survey. And what you find is that just like when you do satisfaction surveys in marketing, you get the people who love you, you get the people who hate you, and statistically, the people who are just, oh, comme c'est comme ça, they did what they said that they were going to do, I'm good with that, they don't really share their opinion. You see that very often in the Net Promoter Score as well.
Yeah.
And so, and in particular, the Net Promoter works very well on the service side. Now, it's a little bit more when you have a service deliverable rather than a product deliverable.
You can also use this.
Go ahead.
You can also use this on the internal side. So I've got clients that are very big into consumer businesses, services like telecommunications. So they use the Net Promoter Score on the outside all the time. Well, I've got one client, when they do their annual strategic plan rollout each year, one of the questions we ask people is, how on that same Net Promoter Score of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend attending this meeting next year for a new employee? And so that you're speaking the same language that executives are used to seeing on the outside. And it's a measure of, you don't get that many people saying, yes, absolutely. But you see how the differences are, as Brad was saying, with different stakeholder groups. Like, for example, we had a really high score from all the managers, but low scores from a lot of the operational people. Well, that means that you've got to change the way you're doing the topics in these meetings, because it's great for the managers, but it's almost a waste of time for the operational people. So it can be useful on the internal as well.
Well, one of the things you find with Net Promoter, as we find so often in comm measurement, it boils down to, did you meet the expectations of the person who is filling out that survey?
Mm-hmm.
And so they missed one of the communications that went out there. And so they missed the part that said, this is how this is going to meet your expectations, fulfill your needs, right? All of this kind of measurement. And so they say, you know what? I expected so much more. I expected to learn 5 things in this 1-hour program that you did for us. And you say to yourself, but no, we really only said we were focused on 2 or 3. And so you have to really have a good handle on and it's satisfaction surveys or Net Promoter, any of those things, of what are the expectations of the people that are going to fill that out. Because if you don't know that, it's kind of like shooting in the dark to say, do you have a metric or not?
But I think the point you make, Shel, is that, is there one measurement that is the king of all? And the answer is probably no.
No.
One measurement to bind them all.
Yeah. And we're always, our job has often historically been to look for that simple, elegant solution. We want to do it easily, tie it up with a bow, and this stuff is complex, and it's not easy sometimes to get your arms around, and we need to be able to. One of the beauties of having worked in a tech firm for so long is you're surrounded by people who are very, very left-brained and who analyze data and come up with the objection. You need to be able to sort of be 2 steps ahead of them, looking at your stuff and asking the questions that they would ask, and you just, like Angie does, partner with somebody who knows this stuff and does this every day, and find out what they look at, and say, I was going to do this. Does this work? And they go, oh, well, you haven't thought about this. It's like, okay, I need to go back and do this. And that's an education process that for those of us who are looking for that simple one, click, I get it all done. It ain't there, but we got a big challenge ahead of us.
This complexity issue. I want to go back to George, because of the agency side of the equation. Right now I'm looking on my screen at the AMEC integrated matrix. So if you picture this along the horizontal axis, awareness, knowledge, consideration, preference, action. Along the vertical axis is essentially output, outtake, outcome. They label it PR activity, intermediary effect, and target audience effect. And then in each box, there's a list of different potential metrics. And just to give you an example, under consideration for intermediary effect or outtake, time spent on site channel, share of conversation, expressed opinions, number of fans, number of followers, number of retweets, comments, likes, link backs, and offline media inquiries. How many different measurement approaches and tools does the average communicator need to have in their toolbox in order to be able to measure any given communication assignment?
No more than 5. No, I mean, maybe, or the Trinity, right? The rule of 3. There are 3.
The rule of 3. Yeah.
Again, that's the problem with, we've got all this data now that's so easy to source, whether it's from vendors, whether it's the things we track, and it's the digital age, we can see everything, but it's like, how do you boil it down to the 5 metrics that really matter, that you have to track, that should be on the dashboard of the project? What I've seen work on major marketing campaigns, and this is something they use as an integrated screen across PR, direct, paid, owned media, is they take a spectrum, and it goes back to what we talked about before, like the marketing funnel. We need to measure we want to measure like exposure. We need one metric on engagement. We need a metric on influence, which is message transmission. We need a metric on impact, which is the call to action was activated. People went to the site and asked for a sample, downloaded a fact sheet on the product, whatever. And then we need advocacy, which is people who are sort of then sharing it on their social platforms. And I've seen that's worked across I've seen multi-million-dollar programs where those are the key measures they look at. Now, there's a lot of other stuff they look at in terms of the budgeting process, and I've seen these things that get quite convoluted in terms of mapping the share of contribution of each different discipline. So this is what, all right, so PR got budgeted $500,000. We're looking to generate this many impressions.
Yeah.
That's going to bring this many people to the website. It's going to do this. And we've got a big social media influencer program where we bought all these influencers that are going to drive these many people in, and this is how we're going to measure it all. At the end of the day, there's like a CPM measurement for each one of those. So the PR was $6 CPM, the influencers were $15, and then we see how effectively everybody's working, and that determines how much you play in the next budget. On a practical basis, I think for what most of the stuff that most of our IABC members deal with day to day, there's got to be a simpler dashboard that you look at that you can go into management and say, this is what we did for the organization or for the product or for the brand, and it's a simpler measure of this is how visible we are, how much exposure we get, maybe how that compares to our competitors, because management's always very curious as to why does brand X get so much attention and not us? What's that all about? It's engagement, how engaged we are with people, influence, impact, and advocacy. And summarizing that on a very simple chart display that you can share with management, just a one pager. I think that's the simplification is the key, because otherwise we're just going to drown in all this data. I mean, the thing you described, Shel, what does it mean?
I think you should look at that as a toolbox. Anyone who's handy with his or her hands has a toolbox. Now, there are so many tools in there, and some of them you might only use once every 5 years, and some you're going to use every day. It's for the right situation, which tool is the right one to use. So it's good to have that range available. But, I think the key is you need to measure some level from did the message get out to did the message get heard, understood, and acted on. So you need to have something out of each of those stages, but you don't have to have 5 at every stage.
Right. And we are literally down to our last minute of the broadcast. So what I want to do is go around very quickly and ask for your view. If a communicator is just now coming to terms with the fact that they need to plan to measure their next communication, and this is just right on top of them, what's your one piece of advice for getting started quickly and easily? And we'll go in reverse order this time. Mary, what would your one piece of advice be?
Well, you threw me for a loop. I wasn't ready. I was going to listen to everybody else. The one thing that I would say is look at that touch point map that you put together, and at every milestone, you just consider what you're going to measure at that point. You already do that. So, this is just a simple way to kind of add this on. Great.
George?
I would say just, again, find ways to keep keep it simple, come up with a framework for how you can present the measurement on 3 or 4 key metrics overall, and stay disciplined and stay with it over time.
Dynamite. Brad.
I would say that managers want to drive you to causality, cause and effect. We're looking for that simple, oh, we communicated and therefore. And I think what we need to do is say it is never that simple, and rarely is there a direct line between most of what we do and the end effect. So look for higher levels of measurement and evaluation, and begin to understand that it's rarely as simple as some would like us to be.
And actually, that's a nice
And,
transition.
yeah, I was going to say, and Angela.
Because I would say that, but it's important at the beginning of a process of a campaign or a project to ask the question of, ideally, what behavior would you like to change? And do some research right up front about why people are doing what they're doing now and what kind of messaging and channels it would take to change that. Because if you don't do that, you'll never be able to make any kind of connection between what you communicated and what the result was, because what you're doing might be totally irrelevant to getting that result. So I'd say ask at the beginning, what are we trying to get people to do? Understand why they aren't doing it now, and what would it take to get them there? So I would say do the research. Measurement can follow, ideally, but at least do the research so you do the right communication.
Very good. And I want to let everybody know that our next Circle of Fellows, I believe, is on Thursday, June 22nd. The topic is communicating across cultures, and the IABC Fellows who will be participating in that panel are Brenda Seiler, Amanda Hamilton Atwell, Ned Lundquist, and Brenda Seiler. And I think, Angela, I see your name on that list too. So I don't know if we have 5 or if I'm misreading here. But I'll have information posted on that shortly, and it'll go out through IABC and all the other channels that you follow. This will be available both as a YouTube video and an audio podcast later today. So check the FIR Podcast Network at firpodcastnetwork.com for that. And I want to thank the panel for a great conversation today. Thanks, everybody. And am I going to see all of you at conference in June?
I'll be there.
Hoping.
I'll be there.
I've got a booth.
Excellent.
So come to the photo booth.
So what else is new?
Yeah.
Okay. I always love your booth, Angela. Thanks, everybody.
always, you did a
Have a
great
great
job.
rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye all.